Gabby, welcome. I'm so grateful for you to do this. For those that aren't familiar with Gabby, Gabby is a hospice nurse. She's been working with us at Mission Hospice for the last 5 years, primarily as a nurse at the bedside, though she also often is helping us in the office with things like triage and sort of managing what's happening on the back end. Welcome from Burlingame. That is wonderful. Before becoming a hospice nurse, Gabby did this as a sort of midlife career change. She was managing commercial real estate. So this is a gigantic change in terms of career. In addition to being a hospice nurse, Gabby's also a mother, a grandmother, an author, and she'll be reading from her beautiful books tonight. And she's also an artist. So with that, I would just like to turn the meeting over to Gabby and welcome. I'm going to put myself on.
Okay, so I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit nervous. I want to say thank you so much for taking this time to come and hang out with me and showing interest. You know, it's one thing to write the books because I love them, but it's another to be considered an author and to be included in this series. I'm honored and thankful. As Susan said, I was not always a nurse. In my first book, Soft Landing, I kind of talk about the obstacles, but before I go there, I want to share a little bit about me and some maybe some personal stuff. And then I'm going to take you on a little trip through both of my books. And I'm going to finish with a blog that I've written that has not been shared with anyone yet, so you get to be the first to hear it. When I was a little girl, this is kind of very personal. When I was a little girl, my dad used to say things to me about not being very smart. You know, he used to say, you're not very smart. You're not going to amount to much. You're not going to do much. And I took that with me most of my life, and especially my young adult life. And I allowed that to determine the depths that I would go, the choices that I would make. And I really didn't think that I was worthy. And that's, first of all, that's just not nice, right? But more than that, it set me up for failure in many ways. When I decided to go back to school and become a nurse, it was really hard. And in my first book, Soft Landing, I talk about that. I talk about the obstacles, and there were a lot of obstacles. But when I walked across that stage and I graduated nursing school, I realized that he was wrong. And he passed away many years ago. I wish he was here now because I know he would take those words back. And I think he'd be pretty proud of me. I wrote Soft Landing because, well, I don't know if you guys can see it, but this is a copy of it. I wrote it because I wanted a chance to write down all the really great things that I was learning in my hospice and nursing experience, the people I was meeting, the lessons I learned about life through death. And I wanted to share them. I wanted to give some of these tips that I had been so graciously given, and I wanted to share them with anybody who sits at the bedside, because I don't think that you have to have a license to be at the bedside. And if you read anything that I've written or you've heard me talk before, one of the things you'll probably hear me say often is how I feel about caregivers and the volunteers, both of which do amazing work. And I think that they are more up close and personal in many times. And I wanted to give them all my tools because I wanted them to be able to do even more. And so I wrote the book. The first couple pages is about the obstacles that I had starting in nursing school. So I'm not going to read anything from that part because I want you to read that yourself when you hopefully get the book. But I'm going to start with one of my first patients that I kind of had from start to finish. Before I worked in the hospice department, I started in home health, and she was on our home health program. And then she became a hospice patient, and I was with her through the whole time. I took care of her for almost a year. She had lungs, and so she had to have that drained. So I would drain her lungs every day. And I would spend a lot of time with her. So I wrote a story about her, and it's called Coloring outside of the lines. I started seeing a woman who had tumors on her lungs. Fluid was building around her chest cavity and pain was her main struggle. My job as her nurse was to drain the fluid from her lungs. This process took about an hour in total each time, which allowed us time to talk and get to know one another. She was an artist but had not been able to paint since she became ill. I was just starting out learning to paint using acrylic at the time. She encouraged me to bring my paintings when we visited and shared her opinions very honestly. She told me often that I needed to go outside my norm, to color outside the lines. She talked about how she sees color and what inspires her to paint. She encouraged me to look at trees and flowers, the ocean, the sun, the moon, the sky. She taught me to see the colors in everything, and when something strikes me, to pick up the paint and play, and I did. She talked about a trip she took years before, walking the Camino in Spain. We talked a lot about her experience on that trip and how much she learned about herself and how much she grew. She constantly tried to talk me into booking the trip and doing it myself. She continually tried to push me out of my comfort zone, to try new things, to challenge myself, to break free and explore. Before I finish the story, I want to share something with you. This particular patient opted to take the End-of-Life Option Act medications, which I know that there are two sides to that, and some people might not support that. She was one of the first patients I experienced that with, and so I hope you'll keep an open mind as I continue. Our conversations were honest, creative, and full. We talked often about life and how fragile it can be. I tried everything to find ways to manage her medications in a way that would relieve her of pain. I made her smoothies and soups in hopes to entice her to eat. I called her every single day at 10 a.m. to check in on her. This became our routine. I did everything I could to help her find some semblance of comfort. I was not successful. She was in pain every single day. She had no desire to eat, and our visits always ended in tears. She decided to do the End-of-Life Option Act, which was about to become legal in California. We spoke a lot about this in our visits. We talked about the conflict her family had with the decision. We talked about things she needed to take care of, the loose ends, the paperwork, and the goodbyes. We talked about when and how and when, the when being the choice she struggled with most. Some days her pain was so bad she wanted to do it that day. Some days it wasn't so bad, so she thought maybe she could wait a little bit longer. It was a constant tug and pull for her, and I supported her every single day, providing comfort, support, and a listening ear. She was finally ready and set the date. She reached out to her Buddhist teacher to ask for prayer and support while she prepared herself. She did not want many there, but she wanted me there. The day she was to do this, I arrived at her house. It was 4 p.m. in the middle of November, so the sky got darker earlier. It was threatening rain. It took everything I had not to cry. I had been taking care of her for a year. She was my patient, but she had also become my friend. I took a deep breath. I walked in the door. I kissed her on the cheek, hello. She was sitting in a chair, Indian style, with a cup of tea in hand. She was so calm and peaceful. In fact, more peaceful than I had seen her in a really long time. There were only a handful of people in the room, as she was very selective in choosing who would be there that day. I met the doctor in the kitchen, where one by one, we emptied a capsule into a bowl and spilled it out little by little. As the medication went into the bowl, I said a tiny prayer for each capsule. May her journey be safe. May she know how loved she is. May she never experience pain again. Each prayer was said with the intent to send her on her journey. My heart ached, and yet at the same time, I was so happy this option had passed and people were finally allowed to make a decision, to no longer suffer and to be able to die with dignity. We finished preparing the medication, and together the doctor and I went into her room. We sat down and listened as the Buddhist prayers continued. When it was time, we walked over to her side of the bed. I kissed her on her cheek and I said, I love you. She said, I love you too. She drank her medications and she sat cross-legged on her bed. And in about 10 minutes, she looked over at me and she said, wow, this is happening so fast. I'm going now. And she waved goodbye and fell asleep. 30 minutes later, she took her last breath. I said goodbye to my patient, and I said goodbye to my friend. And she said goodbye to her pain and her discomfort. A lot of things happened after she passed away. I walked the Camino in Spain, and I thought of her every step of the way. When she had passed away, her sister had handed me a letter, and in the letter was her telling me how much she loved me and appreciated me, that I provided really good care, and then she had left all of her art supplies for me. So I remember the day I loaded up all the supplies and I brought them into my car, and then I took them home and I put them in my studio. To this day, I still paint with her brushes. I have a scarf that hangs in my studio that she gave me, and she will always be a part of my heart and a part of what made me the hospice nurse I am today. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book, was because I wanted to share what I learned. You know, people talk about death and how scary it is, and there's this dark cloud that hovers over, and I get that, but that's not what I see. I see life, I see love, I see culture and faith. I see human beings going through a really tough time, and that's life. I meet the most amazing people, and they, at the end of the day, they always say thank you. Their families say thank you. But the truth is, I want to say thank you to them, right? Because, gosh, I don't think they have any idea the gifts that they give me. They fill me up. They save my life, quite frankly. Anyway, I'm going to keep reading to you, and I'm going to cry a lot. Just bear with me. One of the things that people, you know, when someone dies, when someone's preparing to die, is grief. There's anticipatory grief. There's grief that you feel during the dying process, and there's after. And I get asked a lot of times, what do we do? How is this going to feel? What do I say? And I mean, there's just a myriad of different experiences that grief evokes. And I have my own thoughts on that. So I'm going to read you a little something I wrote about grief. One of my most humbling realizations was learning to let go of my tools and hand them to the loved ones. Learning to step back was huge for me. It is so easy to step in and guide the family from the bedside, but what I have come to realize is just how much better it is for the family if I give them the tools and teach them how to use them. What I have noticed is that the grieving process is just a little gentler when the family is involved in the care and when they are fully present at the bedside. I find joy stepping back and allowing them to have the chance to provide the care. I hear people say it will get better with time after someone passes away, but I struggle with those words. My sister passed away several years ago. She was sick for a very long time, and she fought the good fight. After she died, I couldn't help thinking I wished I could have done more, visited more, told her in more depth the true effects she had on me all these years. I have regrets. And it has not gotten easier. In fact, I think it has become more painful for me because I miss her terribly. When I was going through nursing school, she supported me from a hospital bed. She encouraged me every step of the way. She did this all my life as well. She was always good to me, even when I didn't reciprocate. I have learned that it does not get better with time. It gets a little less painful maybe, but loss is loss. I think of grief as an ocean. Some days the waves come up gently against the shore. They linger there a bit and then slowly roll back to where they started. Some days though, it's like a wild crashing wave coming down so hard on the shore, it feels as though they could break something. And when they go back out, it takes a little piece with you. But it can work the other way too. You can stand at the shore, and as a wave comes towards you, ask it to please carry some of your pain you're feeling and take it away, hand it to the ocean, ask it to help you. This works for me. Death is emotional. Loss is emotional. Missing someone is painful. Death reminds us how beautiful life is and how much we take for granted. My advice to people after someone dies is to go through the emotions, whatever they may be. Cry when you need to, feel everything as deeply as you need to, Don't hold anything back, but also don't be afraid to laugh or smile. There will be moments where you might find something funny, or you are having a good time and you stop because you think maybe you shouldn't be feeling this way or acting this way. Stop that. Laugh, play, enjoy your life. The person you said goodbye to would want you to enjoy your life. Life is fragile, it is unpredictable, and there are no guarantees or promises that anything beyond this very second is for sure. And yet, as humans, we continually think beyond the tomorrows, and we use words like one day when we talk about something we hope to do. If I have learned anything at all in my work, it is that right this very moment is the only thing we can be certain of. I have learned that you can never say I love you too much, that sometimes a hug says so much more than words. And I have learned that kindness and compassion are the best gifts you can give someone else, whether they are family, a friend, or a complete stranger. Death doesn't have a time clock. It doesn't know if it's day or night, Monday or Tuesday, or whether it's a holiday or the Super Bowl. Death is not predictable. And because of this, it's our responsibility to make sure that moments matter for us and for everyone we love. And we make the very best that we can out of right now. I was sitting at the bedside of a daughter with her mother, and we were talking, and I was giving her some tips of things that she could do, and she was doing them, and she was doing them well. And she really brought comfort to her mother. And I felt that, and she felt that. And as we were sitting there, we were talking about a bunch of different things. She said to me something, and I put it at the end of this book, and I really liked it, so I want to share it with you. She told me that when it was my time to go, all of my patients in their full glory would greet me. They will take my hand, they will hug me tightly, and they will thank me for the love I gave them. And they will each sit me down and tell me all about their lives before they met me, and I will see them just as they were then. I look very forward to that, because when we meet our patients, they're at the end, they've already been given the diagnosis. We didn't know when they were walking tall. We didn't know when they were laughing loud. We didn't see them with their children or their loved ones. We didn't get to see them at the time that they were so full of life. And if going forward, each time I sit at the bedside, each time I love my own family and friends, I hope that when it's my turn, when I have to go, that I am greeted by all of them, because I really want to know what they were like before I took care of them, before I sat at the bedside with them. But the lessons they give me now, my takeaways are so big. And each person I sit at that bedside with, each family member that I hug, each human that I get to have even a tiny little moment with, it's like I've got all this space inside of my heart, and there's always room. I never run out of room, right? It just keeps filling up with yumminess. I get to take all of this with me, and that's why I write the books. I write them so that I can share some of that with you, so you can appreciate why I do what I do, what any of us in hospice, why we do what we do. So I finished the book, I sent it out, and then I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd been writing for almost 2 years. That little tiny 44-page book took 2 years. So I started a blog, and the blog is thehospiceheart.net. And I add to this blog every week. And sometimes there are lessons I learned. Sometimes there's stories about pretty amazing patients that I got to take care of. Sometimes it's about our team, because I respect our team so much. And I have learned through my experience that this work is not a solo act. The reason hospice comes with a team is because each situation requires care that might specifically be for a social worker, a chaplain, a doctor, a nurse, but it also might really need a volunteer or a home health aide, or any one of us we are a chain link fence that is securely wrapped around any person at the end of their life. And we cannot do this by ourselves. And that is what I'm learning, is how important each team member is, and that we can't do this by ourselves. So I started writing this blog, and I had so much fun with it. And I'm constantly adding new things and new stories. And I also had these beautiful pictures with each one, which has also made it kind of fun. And then the more blogs I write, I realized that people aren't going to read the first few blogs because, you know, now they're reading the current ones, right? So I decided, well, now I have to write another book because I got to put all those blogs in there. So maybe I could get somebody to read those too. So I started writing the book with the idea that I would put my blogs in there. And I wanted it to kind of carry forward from my first book. So I decided to write a little bit more about myself. And as I started doing that, I realized there were some things that happened in my childhood. And, you know, up before even the age of 12, I think, were some really poignant moments in my life where I realized now that I think I was always meant to be a hospice nurse. So one of the stories I wrote about is my first death. So I'm going to read that to you. It's called My First Death. When I was about 8 years old, a young man on his motorcycle came around the corner near my house. I was in my bedroom, and I can remember very clearly hearing the motorcycle as it roared closely, and then I heard a crash, and then I heard silence. He had come around the corner and hit the tree so hard, he went one way and the bike went the other. I ran out of my house and right up to him. I wasn't afraid. And while it didn't even occur to me then, I must have had some instinct because I immediately fell to my knees. I took the sweatshirt from around my waist and I tied it around his leg to catch all of the blood. And there was a lot of blood. I placed his head in my lap, and I remember slowly smoothing out the hair and his hair on his head and telling him that help was on the way. I'm not even sure how I knew that or whether or not help was actually on the way, but it seemed at the time the right thing to say. I remember hearing sirens shortly after, and soon paramedics were at the site. A neighbor grabbed me and pulled me away. I watched as they all moved around him quickly, opening packages of things and paper flying around and sounds of beeping and activity that felt chaotic. I just stood there and watched. I don't recall being scared. In fact, I don't think I really felt anything at all, except for wondering where his parents were. I kept thinking his parents really should be there, which is ironic because my parents weren't there. I was not being supported by family. I was alone on the side of the street near my home in the arms of a neighbor as someone was dying. All of a sudden there was silence, and the team of paramedics that were working on him started to stand up and back away. I watched as they got him up on the gurney, covering him completely and putting him in the ambulance. The police that had arrived during all of this started to clean up the trash and debris left on the ground. I watched as it took 2 people to pick up the mangled motorcycle and move it to the side of the road. And then I watched as one of them picked up my ragged yellow sweatshirt that was soaked through with blood and tossed it in the trash. Of course I didn't want it, but no one even asked if I did. No one seemed to know that I was still there, or that this might have affected me somehow, or that I was there when he first crashed and held his head in my lap. I imagine now that he must have died that day, quite possibly while in my lap. I don't remember anything after that day, any stories that were told or questions being asked. I don't remember my family discussing it. I do remember always looking at that tree with a very lengthy gaze each time I passed it by. And now, looking back, I remember how much sense it made to comfort him then. I was such a brave and fearless little hippie girl back then, filled with so much empathy. I had no idea what death meant or how permanent it was, but I was always the first one to nurse a bird with a broken wing, getting squished insects to safety, and always feeling bad for anyone with cuts or bruises or worse, broken bones. But death? I did not have much experience with death. And that young man who died after crashing his motorcycle near my house was my first death, and my initial reaction was to run to his side and provide comfort and relieve him of fear. I truly believe that was the first moment my heart started making itself open to hospice. I didn't remember that story until I started writing this book. And the first few stories are about my parents, both of who died. I didn't know anything. If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have been more comforting to them, more comforting to myself. I had quite a few deaths after that that I didn't understand. And I write about that in the book. Um, you know, unless you see as much as we see in this business, I don't think you really understand what it means to take a last breath and how important the breaths before it are. And a message that I give quite frequently is to not wait for the bedside to say the things, you know, the I love yous, the thank yous, even the you really screwed me over, you know, or I'm mad at you, or any of that stuff. Say it, get it out of the way, because that moment at the bedside, that's that very last moment. And you don't want them or you to have regrets. So if you live a life filled with saying all the things, you don't have to worry about saying them later. And it's definitely a lesson that I have learned in hospice. And you'll read a lot of that also in both books and in all the blogs. I'm going to read from you something that kind of has a follow-up story to it. We work with a lot of medications in hospice: methadone, morphine, lorazepam. Morphine and methadone kind of freak people out because of the connotation that comes with it. I, of course, am so used to it now, it doesn't faze me, but I get the fear. And if you know me at all, you know that I'm actually not a big fan of medication. I like to do the kind of tactile stuff first. So if I could calm you with a gentle hand on your chest, or hold your hand, or talk to you in a really nice, quiet voice and let you know that you're not alone, I'm going to try that first. But the medications have proven to provide calm and comfort in a time that's distressing and discomforting. So I do support it. I just want people to understand that while their fear is understandable, I wanted to write something that might make them feel a little less afraid of the medications. So I called this one Ativan, Morphine, Methadone, Oh My. If I could have my choice, I would have a death that was entirely comforted by compassionate and loving tactile stimuli. But the truth is, we almost always need the medications at the end of life. One of the struggles we often face is fear of the medications, especially morphine or methadone. People hear these words and they think addiction or death, as though regardless of the terminal diagnosis, those medications will cause a death faster. Some families refuse them completely. I had a patient many years ago. She was in her 80s and her main struggle was shortness of breath. The family was very against medication and wanted only to pray at the bedside to relieve her of her suffering. While I respected their faith, I asked her son to please allow me to give just a small dose of morphine. I explained the benefits and the comfort I truly felt it would bring her. He refused, but in the same breath, he kept saying to me, with his eyes filled with tears, "Help my mom. Please help my mom." He and his brother were the decision makers, but his brother was in Japan and he could not make any decisions without him. I climbed up into the bed with her. I sat behind her to hold her up as upright as I could, and I too prayed that this would help, but I knew I couldn't help her, and my own eyes filled with tears. I climbed off the bed and I looked him in the eyes and I said, "I am going to the med cart and I'm going to get a very small amount of morphine and I'm going to bring it back here. While I'm gone, please call your brother and let him know that I can help her, but I need you to trust me." Knowing there was still a chance they would refuse, and I needed to respect that, I went to the med cart and with shaking hands, I filled a syringe with only 5 milligrams of morphine, and I walked back into their room. Her son looked at me and he said, "We trust you." I gave his mother morphine and her breathing was calmed. This was a good day, and I was so thankful they agreed. I don't want to come off as a medication pusher, but sometimes these medications are the difference between a death with suffering and a death with peace. People are afraid of medication, and I get that. Before I became a nurse, I would have never thought that methadone could bring as much relief as it does, because I can't help but equate it to the devastating addictions and/or deaths that it can provoke. The purpose and the outcome are different when administering medications to someone healthy versus someone at the end of their life. We spend a lot of time with families educating them about each medication, explaining how they provide relief and comfort, and reassuring them that the doses we administer are not going to hasten their death. Education is a powerful tool, and if used correctly, it can ease the fear that many people experience relative to the medications we use. Another fear is addiction. I can't count how many times I've been asked, will he or she become addicted? Well, I never entertain that worry. Their concern and their fear is real. I reassure them that becoming addicted is not a concern they need to have. I can say this with confidence because I know their end is near, and these medications will only bring relief. As clinicians, we understand the method of action for the medications we use. We know their benefits, we are usually prepared for their side effects, and we've become almost immune to the fear of them. But that doesn't make it okay to downplay someone else's fear. And I truly believe if we take the time to educate and reassure them about the medications we would like to administer, we could relieve their fear rather quickly. I had a patient once tell me that morphine was like a thick velvet blanket, that when given will slowly flow through the body with comfort and softness, finding the places that ache the most and sink deep into them until they are gone. I use this analogy often. I also like to say things like morphine and lorazepam are very good friends. They play nicely together because people panic when we want to give more than one medication at a time. But at the end of the day, whether it is said straightforward or warm and fuzzy, all that really matters is that the family trusts you to administer whatever medications you feel will reduce the pain and suffering. It is all about trust. Our first responsibility with a patient and their family is to build trust. Once we establish that and are able to break down some of the walls, we can work together to ensure a softer landing. But in order to do that, we need to communicate, educate, and respect the fears our patients and family might have. This was one of my blogs, and I don't know, about 3 months after I posted that blog, I received an email, and it was from a gentleman who told me that 2 years ago, his husband had died. Just before he died, the hospice nurse was on the phone with him and told him to give him some morphine. So he gave him some morphine. About an hour later, his husband died. For 2 years, he carried on his shoulders the weight of the feeling that he ended his husband's life. My words aren't any different than what other people have said. Maybe I just said them differently in a way that he heard them, but he thanked me because he realized it wasn't the medication that ended his life, it was the diagnosis. So it's really important that we as hospice workers take our time to explain what the medications will do, the effects they will bring, and to help families feel a little safer, because if they're not safe, then they are scared and they will carry that with them forever. And I don't want that responsibility. So if you can just be straight up and raw and honest and say, look, this is how it's going to be, this is what's going to happen, and they might actually have no more pain because of it, welcome them into that conversation. Trust them with that information. It is kind and it is the right thing to do. A couple more things I want to read to you. I'm going to try to pick, let's see which ones I like. This one's titled, Ask Me How My Day Was. I'm actually not going to read it to you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. People don't ask me how my day is because they're afraid I'm going to tell them. They're afraid I'm going to tell them about some great death I had, and I wonder sometimes if maybe I'm getting less invitations to parties because I am such a buzzkill. I bring up death everywhere I go, and I make people cry, and I can't help it. But what they're crying from is the realization that maybe they still have some ache from some loss that they haven't worked through. And I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to be a little more sensitive and make sure that the whole room wants to hear about it. But what I'm saying with that title, and you'll read it if you read my book, is, if you know anyone who works in hospice, and that's anyone, if you know a volunteer that sits next to the bedside, they work in hospice. If you know a caregiver that bathes someone who's at the end of their life, they work in hospice. The social workers, the chaplains, the doctors, the nurses. It's really hard what we do. And it would be really nice if you asked us how our day was. And you may not want the full story, but we'd sure like to know that you want to know. We need to know that you feel us. All right, I'm almost done reading this stuff, and then you guys can ask all the questions you want, and I'm kind of excited about that. As I said, I write a blog, and each week I write something new, and I get a little excited about it because it helps me to let go of some of my stuff, and I like handing it over. It feels good to write. This particular story just happened recently, and the reason that I want really the importance that this story brings to me is the importance of the whole family, the patient and the family. Sometimes what we do isn't for the patient. Sometimes it's for the family. And I think that's really important. One of the first things I was taught in nursing school was to assess the room. You walk into a room and you assess it. You look at the patient, obviously. You look at the people who are waiting at the bedside, the family members, the friends, the children, the adults. And you kind of look at them and figure out how they're doing and reach out to them, because our job is not patient specific. Our job is, we're like the whole package, because at the end of the day, when someone takes their last breaths, they're the ones that move on. They're the ones that have to carry with them the rest of their lives. And if there is something you can do to help comfort them, to soften things just a little bit, maybe their grief would be a little less. Maybe if you paid attention to their needs and softened their ache, they could feel a little bit more comfortable at the bedside, and maybe their goodbye would be a little more poignant and memorable, and they can take that with them. And this blog is about that. And it's called The Very Best Last Goodbye. And no one has heard this. You guys are the very first ones. I walked into the apartment having absolutely no idea what I was going to be presented with or what my role was to be. There was disconnect amongst the family members, each trying to navigate her rapid decline and not feeling heard or supported by the people closest to them, which made for a very emotional and complicated situation. I went upstairs to her room, and I knew immediately that she had a very short time left. As I turned to look at the family, they were each staring at me with hope in their eyes, and I knew the conversation we needed to have would be difficult. We walked downstairs, and we gathered together in the small living room. The room was unbearably hot, and I was wearing a mask, a gown, gloves, and booties, and feeling uncomfortable, claustrophobic, and wishing desperately that I could rip the layers off and feel a little more present for these beautiful people who were so very clearly counting on me for answers. I started off by telling them I did not believe she had much time left, suggesting hours, possibly days, but really focusing on the hours as that seemed to be more realistic to me. They were not on the same page, each processing it all very differently, which made their tones harsher as they talked over one another, and the tears fall harder the more frustrated they became. I put on my mama bear hat and gently reminded them that what she needed was for them to support and respect one another, to hear and listen to each other, and to accept that no one deals with death the same way. So they absolutely must accept their differences and come together for her. I reminded them that at least in this moment, it was not about them, that this was her experience, and they needed to find a way to come together. I felt like I was being a little harsh, but I wanted to try and find a way to redirect their focus so as not to waste any of the very short time they had left with her. I encouraged them to each take time separately and privately with her to say the things and to say goodbye. I said something I say often, which is to assume this is her very last day and to make it the very best last day, making sure they say what they need to, avoiding any chance for regret. I told them that as a mom, her biggest worry would be that they did not take care of one another. I suggested that they let her know they would, and that despite how much they will miss her, that they will be okay. And in that same breath, I told them I understand that they're not going to be okay, that this will be really, really hard. But she needed right this moment to know that they were going to be okay in order for her to rest and let go. There were several grandchildren in the family, ranging in ages from 2 to 12, all of whom had a very strong bond with her. The question I was asked, and I struggled with this the most, was, do we tell them the truth or do we keep it from them that she is dying? As a mother and as a grandmother, I pulled from what I would want, and I suggested they tell the truth, be honest with them that her time was short, and allow them to make the choice to sit with her, visit with her, or stay away. Taking that choice away from them would be something they would never forget, and if their bond was as strong as they said it was, I felt that they deserved the chance to say, I love you, I'll miss you, and goodbye. I suggested the 6-year-old draw a picture for her and maybe read her a book. I emphasized the importance of allowing them the chance to say goodbye, or at the very least, allowing them to make the decision for themselves and not take that away from them. Before I left, I went over the medications and suggested other things they could do to bring her some comfort and reminded them to call if they had any questions or concerns. Knowing they probably weren't going to call, I called them about an hour later asking how she was. And hearing moaning in the background, I suggested they give the medications we discussed. An hour later, I called back. The medications hadn't been effective, so I suggested another dose. I called again about 20 minutes later, and she was finally calmed, and I could hear her son's voice relax a little. He was able to comfort her and quiet her moans, and that was huge. And I told him that. I let him know that what he brought her, that he brought her peace, and in many ways, I think he did this did the same for him. He needed to know in his heart that he helped reduce her struggle, that he did as much as he possibly could for her. About 2 hours later, her son called me to say that she had stopped breathing and asked if I could come. I arrived about 30 minutes later, walking into the same apartment I had left a few hours before, only the energy was different. The family seemed at peace. They were calm and they were comforting one another and really kind with their words. They had come together for her and my heart filled. I walked upstairs to confirm that she had in fact taken her last breaths. She looked peaceful and she looked beautiful. I turned to look at them and nodded yes, which brought tears. We talked about bathing her and changing her clothes. I suggested flowers in her hands and playing her favorite music, which they agreed to do later together as a family. When we got downstairs, they told me that after I left, they reached out to all of the grandchildren, letting them know that she didn't have much time left and asked them what they wanted to do, asking if they wanted to come and visit her to say their last goodbye. Every family member had a private moment with her at the bedside. Her 6-year-old grandchild drew her a picture and read her a story, and her children promised her they were going to take care of one another. And after all of this was said and done, she took a few last breaths and passed peacefully and beautifully with them at her bedside. It was the very best last goodbye. So I'm done reading. I hope that you felt my heart because I gave it to all of you. And I'm open to questions. If you have some, I would love to hear from you. Susan's gonna kind of take over with that and let me know what you guys have to say.
Well, I just want to say, Gabby, thank you so much for such a beautiful talk. as many people know, my mom died just a few months ago, and our family was one of discord. We did not agree. Her 5 kids almost never agreed on anything, but we agreed at her bedside that we would do what you had advised that family to do. And it was just such a beautiful, beautiful opportunity for our family. And your words just convey so much heartfulness, which this reminded me of a woman who came into the office one day when we were doing a volunteer training, and she was looking for a bereavement group that was meeting the next weekend. And I had the opportunity to introduce her to one of the social workers, and she complimented the volunteer that had been caring for her and her husband while her husband was dying. And about an hour later, after she spent some time with the social worker, I ran into her again. We had a break, and I was in the restroom, and she came in. And she said, I want to say something to you if you have a minute. And I said, sure, whatever. She said, I have to say that, we went to the hospice house and it was really great, the medications and taking care of his symptoms, but he was a difficult man. And I don't have any problem saying that. But what I couldn't believe was how much the love affected him. And she just said, the medication was important, but you guys loved him. And it was something that I never thought he could experience, that he could die feeling loved. Like he knew I loved him, but he didn't think anybody else in the world loved him. And he got it right at the end that he was wrong about that. And so these stories, I'm just so grateful that I work at a place where we can talk about love, and that is a beautiful way to help somebody heal their life, even if we can't cure their illness. So at this point, I want to just
to click on the participant button, and that will allow you to raise your, if you would like to share something. I see that we have a lot of our volunteers, and I just want to also acknowledge them. Volunteers and our staff, we love you too. And so Kathy has her hand up. Kathy, you can go ahead. I believe you are able to unmute yourself. I will do that. There you go. I'm going to lower your hand and you can go right ahead and just share what you'd like to.
Okay, first I want to say I've known Elise, well, I knew Elise way back when she was, when she was a kid, and then when she became a mother, and I moved away and we lost touch, but we were pretty close. I was a friend of her mom's, and now that I've reconnected, it's so interesting to me. First of all, I'm very proud of you, and I call her Elise. I'm sorry, that's what I always called her. But it's so interesting how our paths went different directions, and now they're back similar. I do a lot of death cafes. I run a lot of death cafes. I work with a lot of people on talking to their families about things. And by the way, thank you, Elise, for introducing me to the Death Deck. It's great for what I do. And I work a lot with seniors and with people who are suicidal and things like that. I've run different nonprofits that deal with those. But it's just it's such a wonderful thing to talk about death and love, because they're so tied together. And you do, it was just such a beautiful job that you did tonight. And so I just wanted to say that I am so happy that we're back in each other's lives.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kathy, we also host a weekly death cafe, which for anybody that's not aware, it's just a wonderful opportunity to talk about death in a safe, supportive environment, and to share stories and experiences and hopes and fears and any of those things. And you're all welcome to join us. We'll send information about how you can do that after the talk. Does anybody else have a question or just a comment or an experience with death that they would like to share? Chuck, I see you waving your hand around there, even though you're not sharing the participant hand, but you go on ahead. You can unmute yourself there. Chuck is one of our volunteers, and just a wonderful And hi,
Gabby.
Lucy.
Hi, Gabby.
Hi, Gabby. I just, I think about the times that we spent at the house with all those different people, and to watch and work with you and your gentleness and loving is such a gift to me as well as to everybody that you touch. Uh, the last patient we worked together with was a friend of mine, the Krups, and you're an amazing young lady, and I truly appreciate not only who you are, but who you're becoming. Thank you, friend.
Before you go, Chuck, I just want to tell you how much I love you, and working aside you and the things that you have taught me, I am better because of you. So thank you.
Thank you. And for those that are Chuck's referring to one of our hospice houses, our hospice house, where Gabby worked for a very long time, and Chuck was one of our volunteers and offers healing touch to our patients there. Anybody else? I see Robin, if you'd like to unmute yourself, Robin, and then Diane Burns Hausler. So Robin, why don't you go ahead? I think you can unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, Gabby. Hi. Do you have any, can you talk a little bit about your experience with this relationship with food and feeding your loved ones? You know, as the resident at the hospice, the patient is nearing end of life, and the family just wants, you know, that relationship between food and love, it's like quite a trying time. The family just wants to feed the resident because it's so tied in with their loving relationship, but you know that the patient is only eating to show that, you know, they're accepting that love, but really they don't want to eat anymore.
Yes, actually that's you know, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's such a tender subject, and you've said it really perfectly, because what it is it's an expression of love. People don't just want to force someone to eat. That's not what it's about. Sometimes they think maybe if they have a little more food or a little more water, it might keep them alive longer. But what I've come to realize, if you tell someone just as honestly but kindly as you can, that that's not helping them. And if you keep doing that, it could cause them to choke, and that's scary. And if you equate the fear that they might have to the action that someone is doing, they might react to it better. But it can't stop there, because then they feel helpless. What I like to do is give them other things they can do. I call them jobs. I give them jobs that they can do for their loved one, because if they have to remove something, then they feel like they're not doing anything. So mouth care is a really big thing at the end of the life. And if they can't tell you that their mouth is dry, they're miserable. So I have a lot of different ways to provide mouth care in a way that is gentle and kind, and you're doing something that's far more beneficial. At the end of life, in the last few hours, is food and water necessary? No. Are you hurting them? Not at all. And sometimes it's in the tone that it's said. Sometimes it needs to be handled very gently, because it's hard. That's really hard to tell someone that they can't feed the person they love anymore because they think they're hurting them. But give them another job. Do mouth care, or massage their hands or feet, or talk to them, or sing to them, or read to them. There are so many other things. But you have to, if you're going to suggest they take something away, I suggest you give them something back.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Let's see, Diane.
Hi there, Gabby.
Hi.
Hi. I look at your
your painting every night. It's right in my bedroom. I can see that every morning and every night, and it gives me great pleasure. So nice to hear you tonight. Really wonderful to hear your stories, and very heartfelt. I wish I had had that book with me when Ed was dying, but it just all brought me back to the whole process and how you wrote it so eloquently and told people so gently and in a very privileged and respectful way about death. I realize also myself that dying is not something that most people want to talk about, or even think about for that matter. And your stories and your way of presenting it are very pragmatic and very gentle and kind. And I hope a lot of people will be able to read your stories and read your books and your blogs and take that to heart, because it's important. In our society, we just don't address it very well. And it just makes the whole process a little bit more palatable, and we can accept it and realize that none of us are getting out of here alive. And it's best to be able to look at that a little bit more, I don't know, respectfully, I suppose, and not so fearfully. So thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad I got the time to listen to you. It's good to see you again. And I do want a chance to get your book. So I hope to do that. So good luck to you. Thank you.
Well, before you go, I have your book.
Yes.
And we have to get together at some point so I can get you to sign it, because your book is also incredibly beautiful. But thank you for taking the time to come to this. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's such an interesting, thank you, such an interesting format is when you're speaking at a screen. You're not in a room and feeling the energy back and forth. It is weird, but you did it very, very well. So I've got one of these coming up in a couple of months. So
you got it.
You were a great inspiration. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you, Diane. And Diane is a beautiful artist and also a beautiful writer. And she'll be speaking on July 2nd at the same time and same place. So we'll be sending some information out about that and how people can find out what other events we're doing. Pamela, I see that you have your hand up. I'm going to ask you to unmute there, and you can go ahead and share whatever you'd like to.
There. Hi, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I may have just accidentally muted you again. Sorry, Pamela.
There we go. We're too efficient. Thank you for hosting this. This is a new experience for me, and I was drawn to it because of Gabby, one of my newest best friends, who I met on Facebook because of our shared passion. And it's great to see you, Gabby.
Nice to see you.
We have communicated in writing, and but I have never heard your voice. So I have your books, of course, and I've read them. So I'm just really delighted to be a participant in this offering tonight. As I said, we met online, and I've been involved with end-of-life care for many decades here in Burlington, Vermont, and have written poetry, have written a book that Gabby and I have shared about. But this is about you, Gabby, and I'm just, what comes across in your writing is so strong and so genuine and so truthful in such a loving way about experiences around supporting people and families through their dying experiences. And it comes through in the same way when you speak. So you're good on both sides. It's just a delight to hear you, because you are a truth bearer, and in a subject matter that many people aren't willing to be open about or comfortable speaking about. So I just wanted to say thank you, and how happy I am to see you. And keep your beautiful heart open in the way it has been thus far, because you're bringing quite a gift. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And in one of my books, I have quoted one of her poems. So
I'm just, it makes my heart so happy that there's so many writers here. I was amiss. Chuck is also a beautiful writer, and he has written a book that is definitely worth the read. And Chuck, I'm going to just put you on the spot here and see if you're available in September to do an author reading here for everybody. We can talk about that off Zoom. But for those of you that like to write or find writing a healing activity, next Thursday from 4 to 6, we're going to be offering a 2-hour writing workshop called Your Story Matters. And I encourage anybody who's had an experience of loss or death or just a life. We, especially in hospice, are so used to receiving other people's stories. I'm so grateful when people like Gabby and other people who are engaged in this kind of work write about it, because it's one of the ways that we can help break down barriers and fears and allow people to get closer to something that, you know, our culture tries to keep out at arm's length as if it's a mistake when it happens to us. So we'll send some more information about that out. And Adelaide, who assists our bereavement coordinator, Isabel, they are currently engaged actually in a 8-week writing workshop called
Writing Through Loss.
Thank you, Adelaide.
hi, Adelaide.
Hello there, Gabby. I would like to thank you so much for your beautiful writing. I can't quite express how simply and powerfully you communicate this world that we share. And then I wanted to say something about the day you and I met, because it turns out that Gabby and I met on a very big day. And that was that I was sort of the chief patient advocate and caretaker for Bob Jarmus. And I was off an airplane from Greenland less than 90 hours when I met you. So literally 36 hours before I met you, we were at Kaiser getting a terminal diagnosis. And I was coordinating 8 or 9 people who were friends, volunteering with care, and 2 caregivers. And when I met you, I know I was coming up the stairs to Bob's house. I was coming back from somewhere, and I just felt like I had a backpack with 90 pounds in it, and if you could imagine wires, and they were like attached to my brain, and I was trying to, you know, be in touch with his children and just and be present. And I was really, you approached me in this lovely way, and I was so not able to go there. I was so trying to hold myself together with these tasks. And I watched you come back, you know, a couple of times, and I got it all of a sudden. It was very, you said very little. It was exactly about the trust that you spoke about. You just helped me to let something down that I needed to let down so that you could step in. And I was still, you know, trying to cope with this enormous change in my best friend's life. So I just will never forget it. It was so skillful. It was so smooth, and it was so human. And I remember apologizing to you for my, not being able to flow with you, because I will be a hospice volunteer for 13 years in October. And now I'm a bereavement volunteer. It'll be 5 years in September, and I adore the bereavement work. But you were, I was in a hot place, and you just wrapped me up. And I think this is exactly a story that needs to be told about hospice. And I think you really get right to the heart of it, that it's really about trust. And it's really about all the secret ways that came through what you read to us about knowing to suggest this and knowing to pull back here. And I love the way that you have very beautifully spoken about, you didn't use the word art, but let's face it, it's an art. It's not just a skill. So I'm thanking you again from the bottom of my heart for that moment, because Bob's path through Mission Hospice was like a flying carpet ride. It could not ever have been better. Mary was his nurse. She was incredible. So just thank you so much. And just thank you for the balm it was to hear you speak about this and get to know you. And just, I don't know how to describe it, but I just feel like you, we like became my friend in some way that I wasn't available to then. So God bless you, and thank you so very much. And keep writing. Above all, keep writing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adelaide, thank you so much for that story. Before I worked as a community education coordinator here, I had been a hospice volunteer coordinator for many years. And Bob and Adelaide met each other in our hospice volunteer program and became the best of friends. And one of the nights that I think I will remember on my deathbed as a memory going through my mind, just even now, just is so beautiful, was coming into Bob's house one night before he moved to Mission House with Adelaide and our friend Kajay on the other side of the bed that was in his living room at the time, holding hands. And we had just read a beautiful piece that our friend, who had been the bereavement coordinator at the hospice we worked at before, had written for Bob. And to be in the room and see somebody who was such a beautiful being being so well supported by people that he met as a hospice volunteer, I don't think it gets better than that. I don't think it gets better than that. And Bob he said to me on a couple of times, I don't deserve, this is just such a good way to die. Do you think I deserve this? And we were like, you absolutely deserve this. And we all deserve this. And so thank you so much, Gabby, for speaking so beautifully about what is possible for people at the end of life. Anybody else have something that they would like to share? I see that Shayna has something that she'd like to, or Shaina, and please excuse me if I've just butchered your name. Yourself there, thank you.
So I'm actually Cheryl, my daughter's Shayna, and I've really only seen Gabby without a mask on a couple of occasions because we met during COVID.
Wow.
We have become very fast and special friends, and I am so proud of you tonight, lady. Wow. I lost my dad in August and did his hospice care, and the year before that, my aunt. I'm a nurse. I'm a pediatric nurse, far from the hospice world, but meeting Gabby has given me a tremendous urge to make sure I can give the gift that I gave my family members to somebody else. And so she's inspired me tremendously. But her last blog she wrote was about smiling behind her mask. And I realized that we one day had to lift our masks down between a window so that we knew we were both smiling. But you never have to worry about that with Gabby because you always see her smile in her eyes. Her patients are so lucky to have her, and you're all lucky to have her. And you were wonderful tonight, so thank you. And I miss you terribly. So keep writing, keep inspiring.
I have to tell you guys how I met her. When I was home in quarantine because I was sick with COVID, she was rallying the entire community here to make masks for people. And so from my bed, and her daughter, Shayna, came over to my house and picked up fabric. Wave, Shayna. And from my hospital bed in her house, we collected stuff to make masks after masks. They donated hundreds of masks to people. And so I met her on Nextdoor because I wanted to help her I wanted to do something from the hospital bed. Mine wasn't a hospital bed, but you know. Anyway, we are going to be friends forever.
Well, you did great tonight. You were so nervous, and not one time did that show. You have given a gift to so many people. So keep it up. I love the blogs. I just think you did amazing. So mwah, mwah.
Oh, thank you so much. I saw that Rosa had shared something that I cannot now find in the chat. And Rosa, I'm wondering if you would be willing to just unmute yourself and either read that or just share that. Thank you so much. And Rosa is one of our bedside volunteers and also at the hospice house, so knows Gabby, and she's also one of our community ambassadors who are volunteers trained to be to support our education programs. So thank you, Rosa.
I don't think Gabby knows this, how much she means to me, because when I first started as a volunteer, I can't really speak because I've got my throat is, I was outside earlier and I've got dirt, but I don't know why I can't speak. But Gabby, I just wanted to let you know how much you meant to me, because my first patient that died at the house, you were there to guide me. And I'll never forget how you guided me with such the way you talk and helped me and allowed me to go outside and cry. It brings tears to my eye to this moment.
You did a beautiful job, Rosa. You are so good with the patients.
Yeah, but if it wasn't for you that first day, I remember I was falling apart because I was with my patient, was with her for almost 9 months. And she died at the hospice house, and I saw her take her last breath. And I was, oh my God, I was like, I can't cry. And you allowed me to say, go outside, go ahead, have your moment. You taught me so much in that moment that I will always remember you. And I'm so proud of you. And I've learned so much from you. And I love the way you write. I read your blogs. I can tell, I know that you know that I'm probably the first ones to read your blogs all the time. And I buy your books and I tell people about your book. So I'm a big fan. And I'm so glad that you came into my life, because you were the person who guided me with my first steps. Thank you.
Well, thank you, because I think you're lovely and that means a lot to me. And keep doing what you're doing. Our patients are so lucky to have you at their bedside. You are truly lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa.
Thank you, Rosa, for sharing that. Anybody else? We have a couple of minutes left here if anybody else would like to share. And just a reminder, Shelley Williamson, why don't you go ahead? If you're unmuted, why don't you just go ahead and share what you'd like.
Okay.
Oh,
Goodness, Gabby. Okay, everyone knows she's beyond fabulous, and she's really the real deal. This woman, I'd like to say, is now my friend, did a tremendous job helping me with my dad, as Chuck did too. But I think I was going to start crying. But I wanted to say that you're a brilliant in person. Your heart is so giving, and your presence and your calmness made all the difference, I believe, in the world to my dad, and I know myself, and I think our family. So I love you, and thank you so much.
What a nice surprise. Thank you.
That's beautiful.
Boy.
Julie, I think this is Julie.
Hello.
Hi.
Dark. It's getting dark.
Julie, who we think?
Hello. Yes, I'm Julie. I work with Gabby at Mission. And so one of the things that Gabby has done for me is she's really sort of changed the nursing style, because, you know, you go through nursing school and they, you know, nursing instructors are very, you know, stoic and don't get attached, and, you know, don't cry in front of the patient and all that stuff. But, you know, one of the first experiences I had with Gabby was at the Mission House, and there was a resident there that had her own queen size or double bed, and she was having a particularly bad day, and Gabby crawled into bed with her and lay down beside her, and I was just shocked. I was a volunteer at the time, and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And that just changed everything for me in that moment. I was like, okay, you can just put your whole heart out there. And, you know, so that was a defining moment for me. So thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, Julie. I love working with you.
I love working with you too.
Yay. Oh my goodness, that's such a great story. And I'd worked somewhere for a number of years, many, many years, where we would hear about boundaries and boundary issues constantly. And I also love that our nurses can just crawl into bed with somebody that's having such a hard time and just needs to know that they are not alone, that there is somebody right here with them that is going to support them for as long as they need that support. It's beautiful. Anybody else have anything that they would like to say or share before we go? Any other hands? Anybody feeling shy in our last minutes but would really like to say something? Okay. It's so sweet. You got us all crying. Rose is writing, I hope you know how much you mean to everybody. I just want to thank. Go ahead.
I have another story.
I was going to ask if you would like to end with a story, and then I'll just give sort of the wrap up of the resources and those things. Yes, please.
This is especially wonderful because of some of the people that are here, that are online right now, because I think that they're going to appreciate this a lot. I call this one Cherry Blossoms. And there's probably a few people on right now that are going to know what this is about. This was at our time at the hospice house. This was a woman who touched every single person she met. She was gentle, she was kind, and she was lovelier than any human you will ever meet. And she was dying. She was with us for several weeks. Her room was decorated in fairy lights her husband had hung for her. There were cards on string that draped across the walls from friends. She considered them art and felt they were too beautiful to be kept in a drawer. There were pictures her students had drawn from her, wishing her well and hoping for a recovery. There were origami swans placed precariously around the room, and crystals and healing beads on whatever tabletop space she could find. There was a feeling of hope that filled her room at all times, because despite the terminal diagnosis and the fact that we knew her time was short, no one wanted to believe it to be true, and none of us acted as if it were, especially her. She drank teas and took herbal remedies, hoping it would give her more time. She welcomed healing touch often and a visit from a shaman, which provided her with a sense of calm and inner peace. I was drawn to her. We had many beautiful personal moments that I will cherish forever. She was an art teacher. She loved art. She was inspired by art, and she encouraged others to tap into their creative side. I shared with her some of my paintings. She was always so supportive and complimentary. I remember when I received the confirmation that I would be hanging my paintings in a restaurant. I was so excited. I told her about the artist reception that was being planned, and I was so proud. The day before the reception, she asked me to come to her room. She handed me a rock that said "Imagine" on it and told me to start believing in myself and to imagine that anything I wanted was possible. I kept that rock with me during the reception, and I continue to touch it every morning as I start my day. Every one of the staff loved her. She loved every one of the staff. I think she said, "I love you" to every person that walked in and out of her room, and she meant it, and we felt it. As she became weaker, we all knew it was getting closer. This was a day we had hoped would never come, but knew it eventually would. When she had the energy, she would make each person an origami swan that was in his or her favorite color. She gave special books or sentimental trinkets away to some, asking that they remember her always. I was a lucky recipient of one of her gifts. It was a hand-carved floating dragonfly made of bamboo. It sits with my origami swan and my rock that says "Imagine." We filled her room with fresh cherry blossom branches and clear vases for her to see from her bed. We hung iridescent butterflies near the window, which moved gently back and forth, and we took turns sitting quietly at her bedside while she slept. Despite how weak she was, she would open her eyes, see one of us there, and smile as she would say our name, followed by "I love you," and then fall back to sleep. We reminded each shift as we would leave to call us if she was close, because every single one of us wanted to be there when she passed. We wanted to say our goodbyes, but more than that, we each needed to have our own closure. I remember the day she passed very well. It was in between the night shift and the morning shift, and we were having our endorsement. One of our home health aides came in and said that she was close. We all dropped everything, and each one of us circled around her bed, and we held hands, and we told her we loved her. I looked around at every person there, and I admired their beautiful hearts, the way they had given them so unselfishly to her, to everyone in our care. There was so much love in that room. Each person kissed her cheek. They told her that they loved her. They thanked her, and they said goodbye. A few hours later, as a small group of us were still at her bedside, she took her last few breaths, and she passed with grace, beauty, and peace. She did not need any medications. She did not struggle. She embraced every last breath, and she closed her eyes for the very last time. We filled bowls with cherry blossoms, and we scattered them on her as we all walked her out to the car. We cried. Sometimes we still cry just thinking about her. Sometimes we would feel her energy in the room. She will never leave our hearts. She was that patient that touched each and every one of us, and she was the piece of the thread that connected all of our fabric pieces together. She helped secure our quilt, and we were all better humans because of her.
Gabby, thank you so much for the beautiful stories. You know, this is so different than what most people think about death, and that this is available for people at the end of their life to die surrounded by love and held in people's hearts like this, and that they are remembered, the legacy they leave. Giving and receiving are the same thing, and that's something I'd heard a lot about. And working in hospice, I got to see it on a daily basis, that we so often get so much more from the people we care for than that we give, and that you can articulate that so beautifully, what turning towards death and what other people might consider suffering allows in our own hearts expansion. And so thank you so much, Gabby. I just want to say that we'll be sending out an email. If I can stay here at the computer, I'll do this tonight, and we'll have some resources, including both of Gabby's beautiful books and a link to her blog. I'll include some information for next Thursday's Your Story Matters writing workshop. And also on June 7th on Sunday, we are hosting a season of remembrance, a memorial service that will be virtual. That is for anybody that has experienced the loss or death of a loved one. And our bereavement and spiritual care department are putting that together. Weekly death cafes are happening on Tuesday mornings from 10 till noon, and this is also another wonderful place to share stories about death and questions or just concerns with other like-minded people. Diane, who shared earlier, will be sharing her writing and her artwork with us on July 2nd. And for anybody that's interested in keeping track of us, you can always find our events at missionhospice.org. hospice.eventbrite.com, and that information will be included in the email. And because there's so many writers here tonight, Isabel Stencil's writing workshop, the Writing Through Loss workshop, is offered 3 times a year. They're in the middle of a session currently, but I believe in the fall there'll be another 8-week session. It will most likely be a virtual session as well. So thank you so much for your time tonight, Gabby. Thank you for taking out your beautiful heart and letting us all see it. And thank all of you who have come from, who haven't come from anywhere. You're all sitting in your own homes around the country. And this is such a beautiful thing to see our community expanding across time and space, and including so many other beautiful hearts. And to anybody who's willing to turn towards the suffering of others, just know that there's a place here that supports that and will continue to provide education and supports for you. So